A boy stands absolutely still during inspection. Beneath his cloak, a fox is eating him alive. Claws digging into his stomach, teeth tearing through flesh, blood seeping into the fabric. He doesn't flinch, he doesn't cry out, he doesn't move. When he is finally dismissed, the injuries are already fatal. He dies without a sound, and Sparta praises this. This is not myth. This is not exaggeration. Ancient sources recorded this story because it embodied perfection, the ideal student. This was the result of proper training. A 7-year-old is taken from his mother today. He will not see her again for years. Tonight he sleeps on reeds he cut with his own hands. Tomorrow he wakes to intentional hunger. He is expected to steal to survive. If he is caught, he is beaten, not for stealing but for being caught. By the age of 20 he will have murdered an unarmed man in the dark, without trial, without hesitation. The state will call this citizenship. What you're about to hear is documented, cross-referenced, witnessed by ancient historians who visited Sparta and recorded what they saw with their own eyes. This is how Sparta turned children into weapons, not through inspiration, not through courage, through systematic psychological dismantling. And here's what no one tells you. It worked so perfectly that it destroyed them. Let me give you the situation Sparta faced. Picture a city-state, maybe 9,000 full citizens at its peak. Could be less. Ancient sources vary, but the range is narrow. A small population. Now picture 200,000 people working the land around them. These weren't immigrants. They weren't foreign slaves shipped in from conquered territories. They were Greeks. Same language, same gods, same ancestors. They were called Helots. And they outnumbered Spartans somewhere between 1 and 22, depending on the century. The Helots farmed the land, grew the food, harvested the crops. They lived in the same valleys, walked the same roads, spoke the same dialect. They knew the terrain. They knew where weapons were stored. They knew when the men were away at war. And they remembered. They remembered when their grandparents had been free. When these lands had belonged to their own city-states before Sparta conquered them. Every year Sparta declared war on the Helots. Not metaphorically, officially, a formal declaration. This wasn't about battles. It was about legality. It made killing a Helot at any time for any reason a legal act of war rather than murder. Think about what that means for a society's psychology. You wake up every day surrounded by people who outnumber you 10 to 1. People who grow your food. People who could poison it. People who know your children's names. You cannot leave. You cannot flee. Spartan citizens were forbidden from traveling extensively or living abroad. Isolation was law, so you have two options: live in constant fear or eliminate fear entirely. Sparta chose option 2, but that required something unprecedented. They couldn't simply train soldiers. Soldiers have breaking points. Soldiers feel fear. Soldiers question orders. When those orders violate basic human instincts, they needed something that wouldn't break. The Agoge was the answer. If you're fascinated by the documented systems that engineered obedience in history's most extreme societies, hit subscribe. We're just getting started with how Sparta turned complete psychological control into a science that ultimately consumed itself. Birth doesn't guarantee life in Sparta. A father doesn't name his son. A mother doesn't decide if he lives. The infant is brought before the elders, the Jerusha. These are men over 60, elected for life. They examine the baby's body. They look for deformities, weakness, unusual proportions, signs of future illness. Modern scholars debate what happened to rejected infants. The popular image babies thrown into a chasm called the epitheti comes largely from Plutarch, writing 500 years after Sparta's peak. He may have been repeating legend, but exposure was real. Exposure is documented across the Greek world. An unwanted infant placed outside city limits, died from elements or animals, or was taken by someone desperate enough to raise a child not their own. Either way, the father returned home without his son. For those who passed inspection, early childhood was brief. You stay with your mother till age 7. You learn to speak, to walk, to understand that you are Spartan, which means you are not like other Greeks. At 7, the state takes you, not metaphorically, physically. You leave your home. You enter the Agoge. You will not return to live with your family, not at 8, not at 15, not at 25. Your name is recorded in a new list. Your identity is now institutional. The transition is imed. 8. No preparation, no gradual adjustment. One day you sleep in your mother's house. The next day you sleep in a barracks with 100 other boys under the supervision of a young man barely older than you. The barracks are not comfortable. Boys sleep on rushes, reeds they cut themselves from the Eurotas River. In winter they're allowed to add thistledown for warmth. That's the extent of Betty. One cloak. That's the clothing ration. Year-round. A single rough garment. No shoes, not in summer, not in winter, not on rocky ground. The soles of their feet thicken with calluses. This is not accidental. Spartan military doctrine will later depend on rapid movement over difficult terrain. Shoes are a weakness. Shoes can be lost. Feet cannot. But the most calculated element is food. They are fed, but not enough. The rations are deliberately insufficient. A boy finishes his meal hungry. He goes to bed hungry. He wakes hungry. Plutarch describes the portion as calculated to make them keen to satisfy their needs through their own resourcefulness. Translation: you're expected to steal, not from merchants outside Sparta. That's unavailable. Spartan citizens don't engage in trade. The economy runs on helot labor, and boys don't leave the training grounds. They steal from each other, from storage areas, from the communal messes. And here's the mechanism that makes it work. Stealing is not punished. Getting caught is punished. If you steal successfully, you eat, you survive. You're demonstrating the resourcefulness a Spartan needs. If you're caught, you're beaten publicly in front of your unit. Not because stealing is wrong, because incompetence is unacceptable. The distinction matters. This isn't moral education. It's operant conditioning. The lesson isn't don't steal, the lesson is don't fail. One story survives in multiple ancient sources. A boy stole a fox. Accounts vary on why, possibly to eat it, possibly as a test of courage. He hid it under his cloak. During an inspection, the fox began tearing into his stomach, clawing, biting, drawing blood. The boy stood silent, expression neutral. He didn't cry out, didn't move, didn't reveal what was happening. By the time the inspection ended, the fox had caused fatal injuries. Modern readers hear this and think, that's insane, that's suicidal. But that's the point. The value system is clear. Death is preferable to revealing weakness. Pain is preferable to failure. Physical destruction is preferable to social disgrace. This story was told for centuries. It was celebrated. It was the standard. The boys are organized into units, aguli or herds. Each herd has a leader, the iron, usually around 20 years old. He has absolute authority over the younger boys. He can order punishments. He participates beatings. His word is law. But he's also being watched. His leadership is being evaluated. How he manages the boys determines his own advancement. The system is self-enforcing. The victim becomes the enforcer. The enforcer knows he's being evaluated for his willingness to enforce. Every interaction is observed. Every moment is a test. There are no private spaces, no solitude, no opportunity to develop an independent identity separate from group surveillance. This is the environment where personality is supposed to form. Ages 7 through 20, the years when human beings develop their sense of self, their values, their conception of relationships. Instead, there's only the group, only the hierarchy, only the state. Emotional attachment to family is systematically suppressed. Boys don't return home for holidays. There are no family visits to the barracks. Mothers don't comfort their sons. One Spartan mother in a famous anecdote sends her son off to battle with the instruction, "Come back with your shield or on it. Victory or death. No other outcome is acceptable." Modern readers hear this and think that's just a dramatic way of saying be brave. But listen to what it actually means. Come back victorious or come back dead. Do not come back defeated. Do not come back if you fled. Do not come back if you dropped your shield to run faster. If you return alive and defeated, you are not welcome. That's not encouragement. That's a threat. And it comes from his mother. The Agoge doesn't just train boys. It trains the entire society to reinforce the same value system. Mothers, wives, sisters, everyone participates in the mechanism of shame. Physical training is constant. Wrestling, running, combat drills. But ancient sources emphasize that the physical component was secondary. Plutarch says the Agoge was designed to produce obedience, endurance, and victory in battle. Obedience is listed first. It's not an accident. The most grueling test was the diamastagosis, the whipping ordeal at the altar of Artemis Author. Boys were whipped in front of spectators, not as punishment, as demonstration. The goal was to endure without crying out, without showing pain for as long as possible. Some died during the ritual. This was documented in later periods as a spectacle that attracted tourists. Romans came to watch Spartan boys bleed. By then, Sparta was a shell of its power. The Agoge had become a performance. But in Sparta's height, this was not entertainment. It was conditioning. You will suffer. You will not react. Your body is not yours. Your pain is not yours. You exist for the state. Around age 18 or 19, a selection occurs. The most capable, the most loyal, the most thoroughly conditioned boys are chosen for something that ancient sources describe with unusual unease. The Krypteia. The word means secret or hidden. Thucydides mentions it. Plato references it. Plutarch describes it in detail. Aristotle calls it disturbing. Here's what happened. Selected youths were sent out alone into the Hellalot territories. They were given a knife, sometimes a short sword, no armor, no supplies. By day they hid in the countryside, unseen, undetected. By night they moved. Their targets were helots. Specifically, helots identified as strong, capable, or defiant, the ones who might lead a rebellion, the ones who might organize resistance. The youths killed them quietly in the dark without trial, without warning. Then they returned to hiding. This continued for an unspecified period, weeks, possibly months. Scholars debate the frequency and scale. Some argue it was a regular institution. Others suggest it was activated only during periods of tension. But the sources are consistent. On one point it happened. The purpose was not military. Helots were unarmed. They weren't enemy soldiers. The purpose was psychological. Think about what this does to an 18-year-old. You've spent 11 years learning that obedience is survival. That's suffering. G is normal. That your identity is collective. Now you're told, kill someone who has not attacked you, someone who is unarmed, someone who is enslaved by your state. Kill them in secret. Don't hesitate. Don't question. If you hesitate, you've failed. If you question, you're not fully loyal. This is the final test, the final severing. The last potential attachment to shared humanity is cut away. You are not a Greek among Greeks. You are not a person with moral boundaries. You are a Spartan. You do what the state requires. And if that means killing an unarmed man in the dark because he looked too strong, too proud, too capable, then that's what you do. The ones who returned without hesitation, without trauma, without doubt, those became full citizens. The crypt was a filter. It separated those who still had limits from those who didn't. At age 20 you become a full-time soldier, but you don't become independent. You live in barracks. Still, you eat in communal messes, Sisha. Every meal is with your unit, supervised, ritualized. The food is deliberately unpleasant. The famous black broth was notorious even in ancient times. One foreign visitor, after tasting it, reportedly said, I understand why Spartans are so willing to die. The point was never nutrition, it was uniformity. Luxury was weakness. Pleasure was distraction. Marriage existed technically, but a Spartan man did not live with his wife. He visited her at night, in secret. Some sources describe young husbands slipping away from the barracks, meeting their wives briefly, then returning before dawn as if nothing had happened. Children were born, but fathers did not raise them. The state did. At age 30, after 23 years inside the system, a man finally achieved full citizenship. He could attend the assembly, he could vote, but he still slept in the barracks, still ate in the communal messes, still trained every day. This continued until age 60. Think about that timeline. From age 7 to age 60, a Spartan man's life was institutionalized. 53 years of communal living, of constant surveillance, of ritualized behavior. By the time he reached 60, there was no version of him that had ever existed outside the system, no private identity, no life before control. The result was exactly what Sparta required. In battle, Spartan units did not break, they did not flay, they did not panic. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans and their allies held a mountain pass against a Persian army numbering in the hundreds of thousands. They held it for 3 days. They died in formation. At Krypteia, Spartan infantry held their line while allied Greek forces around them collapsed. They turned near defeat into decisive victory. For nearly 2 centuries, Sparta dominat. Greek warfare. Not because Spartans were stronger or faster or better fighters, but because fear of disgrace outweighed fear of death. Because running was worse than dying. Because the group was everything, and the individual was nothing. The Agoge worked. But systems optimized for one purpose tend to fail at all others. Sparta's citizen population declined steadily. The standards were unforgiving. Not every boy survived the Agoge, disease, accidents, the brutality itself. Many never reached adulthood, and citizenship requirements were rigid. You had to complete the Agoge. You had to contribute to the common mess. You had to own land worked by helots. As land concentrated among fewer families, fewer men qualified. Citizenship vanished. War losses removed citizens permanently. Sparta had no reserves, no broader population to draw from. Every Spartan death was irreversible. By 371 BC, at the Battle of Leuctra, the army Sparta fielded was smaller than it had been a century earlier. They lost. Decisively. The Theban general Epaminondas used a weighted left flank formation that shattered the Spartan right. In a single afternoon, Sparta lost roughly 400 citizens out of a total population that may have numbered only 1,500. More than a quarter of its remaining citizens. Gone, there were no replacements. The system that produced perfect soldiers had no mechanism for recovery, no flexibility, no adaptation. You could not recruit outsiders and make them Spartan. You could not shorten the training. That would degrade the product. You could not broaden citizenship. That would dilute the standard. The machine could perform only one function, and when it failed, it could not be repaired. Within decades, Sparta became a secondary power. By the Roman era, it was a spectacle. Tourists came to watch the whipping rituals, to observe the remains of a society that once terrified the Greek world. The Agoge continued in altered form for centuries, but it was no longer necessity, it was performance, a reenactment of a dead system for an audience that no longer feared it. Sparta's achievement was military perfection. Its failure was that perfection in one dimension creates catastrophic fragility in every other. The secret was never brutality, Many ancient societies were brutal. The secret was precision. The Agoge was social engineering, systematic, calculated, designed to eliminate every variable that might produce disobedience. It worked exactly as intended. It produced soldiers who could not be broken, and a society that could not survive. What remains is documentation, cross-referenced, repeated across ancient sources, accounts that disturb modern readers because they are not legend, they are procedure. Instructions for dismantling a human being and rebuilding something that does not question, does not hesitate, does not fail, until the system itself does. And when it breaks, there is nothing left.